Pets bring joy to people. It is so wonderful to come home from work knowing that someone who loves you unconditionally is there waiting for you. Funny cats, friendly dogs, even fluffy hamsters. All these animals have been domesticated by humans and coexist peacefully. But there are also people who are fascinated by exotic animals and have lions, crocodiles, and snakes in their homes as pets. These wild animals usually have special enclosures, but sometimes people will let them out in the open without considering how dangerous they could be. Today, we will tell you about a girl who decided to let a huge python live in her home as a pet. How will this play out? Will the python overcome its natural instinct and become a true friend to its owner? Emily has been fascinated by reptiles since childhood. She always had a strange sense of closeness to them, even when she saw them in the zoo's terrarium. She had long wanted to have such an animal as a pet, but her parents were categorically against such a creature in their house. Therefore, when Emily grew up and lived on her own, the first thing she did was to get herself a 5-meter-long python. All of Emily's friends were shocked by this choice for a pet, but were even more shocked to learn how they lived together. Emily quickly became attached to her new pet, falling in love with him and spending all of her free time with him. She felt it was out of the question to imprison him in a terrarium, so she allowed the python to move freely around her house. At every opportunity, Emily took him into her arms and they would sit together while she watched TV or read books. They even slept in the same bed. The huge python wrapped around the girl's body or settled comfortably on her back, and they slept that way all night. Emily was so accustomed to sleeping with her snake that she couldn't imagine a night without his cold embrace. And it seemed the python was also attached to her, as he followed her throughout the house, always in her sight. Friends warned Emily more than once that sleeping with a huge python in the same bed is extremely dangerous because at any moment he could easily strangle her. But Emily did not listen to anyone. She believed with all her heart that the python loved her as much as she loved him. Several months passed. The python slept sweetly on the girl's body every night, lying on her with his heavy weight. But then Emily began to notice that the weight of her python was declining every day. The huge snake was losing his weight before her eyes. He began to refuse food and stopped eating altogether. In the wild, pythons can live without food for just over a month, but her pet hadn't eaten for 10 weeks. Emily was seriously worried about him, so she took him to the veterinary clinic to find out what was wrong. The veterinarian turned out to be an experienced snake professional who first performed a thorough examination of the snake and then began asking Emily a lot of questions, trying to understand why the python refused to eat even though he seemed to be in perfect health. When Emily told the veterinarian all the details of living together, including the fact that the python moves freely throughout the house and even sleeps in her bed, the doctor looked at her in horror. Now the reason for this python's refusing to eat was clear to him. The thing was that the huge 5-meter python deliberately starved himself all this time as he was preparing for the biggest meal of his life. He had long seen Emily as easy prey, but to digest her, he needed to have an empty stomach, and this could only be achieved by a long fast. Emily did not want to believe the words of the veterinarian because this simply could not be. Her python could not betray her as they lived in perfect harmony. But nevertheless, fear for her own life took over, and the girl decided to give her wild friend to a shelter for cold-blooded animals. This story could have ended very sadly, but fortunately, everything ended well for both Emily and the python. Soon, he was released into the wild, where he belonged. People naively believe that if you feed a wild animal, it will become domesticated and tame, but this is not always the case, and such cohabitation could cost someone their life. Friends, I think you agree with me that wild animals have no place in a person's small home. They are much more comfortable in their natural habitat. Let's respect their nature and let them live where they are accustomed to live.